What is going on today, everyone? Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for coming to the first Club PF event. It's our May event. I'm super stoked to be with you all today. My name is Mark Killins, and I am with a friend of mine who we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last few months. Actually met in person in New York City recently, which was fantastic. I was on his podcast, which we're going to talk a lot about today, of course, and his name is Jason Bradwell. Jason, what's going on?
How's it going, Mark? It is just such an honor to be like the first guest for what I'm sure is going to be an illustrious series for PMF. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you. I mean, you've had 90 plus conversations with people that believe in what we believe in, in the club, all about people first and how to create a go-to-market that puts people at the center of every experience. The wisdom that you're going to share with us today is going to be unmatched. We got a lot of stuff prepared for you folks. It is being recorded, but it looks like, we got a few people who've come in already. Want to give a shout out to Mike. What's going on, Mike? Gavin, Masuma. Hello, Sam. What's up, Sam? He's a member of the club. Caitlin, what's going on? Matt, hello, Matt. Good to see you, Matt. And Jason, we want to make this interactive, right?
I want this to be the most interactive experience of my life. I want Disneyland to not hold a candle to what we're about to do.
I love it. Yes, Sam. Yes. Hello. So, Sam, any listening, if you want to come off mute, want to share your point of view, want to add or ask a question, add something to the conversation, just raise your hand. You can do that right inside of AirMeet. We'll bring you onto the stage. You can be on video or off video. Of course, you can just use the chat to ask questions and leave comments, but we'll try to make this as interactive as possible for you all. And yeah, we're going to get started right now. So Jason, how long have you been doing the podcast?
So I started the podcast in August of 2020. It was a pandemic hobby that ultimately turned into a fully fledged business as of January this year. And it's been honestly one of the best things that I've ever done, professionally. I have met so many amazing marketers and just people generally who have been so kind to share their time and their kind of knowledge and insights with me on how to build a modern day B2B marketing strategy. So yeah, I'm coming up to about 100 episodes. I'm hoping to crack that in the next couple of months. And yeah, it's a labor of love. I enjoy it so much.
I love it. No, it's kudos to you. I did a podcast during the pandemic as well. It's called Community Sense with Carly. Great first season, 9 episodes. Have not done season 2, which is kind of like what 90% of podcasts don't make it past that mark almost.
It's hard though. It's hard to keep up the consistency and keep a high bar for quality and. So I don't hold anything against people who give it a go and then ultimately move on to other pastures because it is hard graft.
Well, we want to actually know because this has to do with what we're going to be talking about today. Really quick question to break the ice. How many podcast episodes, so individual episodes, do you listen to per week? Should say, do you listen to? I'm missing the you. I don't know. I was typing that too fast. I apologize. How many podcast episodes do you listen to per week? Really simple question, folks. Just go to your screen, give us a quick answer. Jason would be grateful because he kind of wants to know. He wants to know, am I producing enough? Is he producing enough? Is it too much, too little? It's interesting. It's really evenly split right now, Jason.
I mean, I've listened to 4 or more probably today. So yeah, I'd be really interested to know kind of how many episodes people listen to on a weekly basis, and when do you listen to it? I mean, if we have a few people coming on stage a little bit later on, and they are avid podcast listeners, how do you squeeze it into your day? Right? Is it in the morning, at the gym? Is it when you're cooking? Is it during work? Yeah, I'd be keen to know that as well.
Because podcast is a great format of content, of course, but it's going to help really spur a community. You can do events around your podcast. Of course, very partner-led motion, right? Typically, right, you're bringing on other people to partner with you in the actual podcast itself. So we'll talk more about that a little bit, but let's get into a few of the things we're going to cover today. First, if you haven't checked out his podcast, please do. But we're going to unpack. We say 6 in the title. I think we're saying, or I've said 6 to people. It's going to be 15 pro tips, easily 15 pro tips, Jason, right? That we're going to share with you all today that I'm confident you'll be able to apply at least one of these tomorrow. Like one of these tomorrow in your business. So if you want to check out the podcast, I just threw a link to subscribe on the screen as well. Highly recommend you do it. And you're almost at 100 episodes, Jason.
Yeah, I'm almost at 100 episodes, and it's a really important milestone for me because you speak to my wife, she'll tell you that I'm one to like pick up a hobby and then go really hard and like really passionately for it, and then give up pretty quickly, like just burn out and then just give up. And the podcast is something I've consistently done for 3 years. And as you say, like we're going to talk about how it fits into like a partner first kind of, a people first motion in a moment. But yeah, it's just something I'm incredibly proud of. And that 100 episode milestone is coming up soon.
Can't wait to listen to that one. So yeah, check out the podcast. I'll keep the CTA up for another few minutes, and then I'll bring it back up a little bit later. But today, folks, we're here to talk about this. And I know some of you folks have seen this. Would love to get your opinion on it as well if you have a thought. But we want to teach you, out of these 90 plus episodes Jason has done with these incredible go-to-market leaders, we want to hone in on community-led, customer-led, and content-led growth. Specifically, though, with this partnership angle as well. Because at the end of the day, like you got to first create demand, right, for what you're trying to sell. You got to get people to become aware of your brand, aware of the problem, know that you can help them solve the problem. And this is for, people that are in market, out of market. You got to capture that demand, turn that into customers, turn that into sales pipeline. And you got to convert that demand so that those customers and those prospects, actually stick around, see quick value, stick around, have high lifetime value. And those customers ultimately help you generate more customers. And we'll talk about the outcome of this people first go-to-market model as being a word of mouth flywheel and an ecosystem, a small or big ecosystem around your business. So today we're going to hone in on community-led, customer-led, and content-led from dozens of conversations Jason's had with people. He's going to unpack these conversations and give you the specifics in what you can do with your business. But I think, Jason, one thing you said before we move on to the next kind of visual, you said something really interesting around customer-led that I think is important for people to understand. Do you want to kind of unpack your take on like converting demand with customers and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the kind of terms creating demand, capturing demand, I think are pretty well known, pretty well understood in B2B marketing circles. Convert demand, I think inherently people understand as like, as you've just outlined there, Mark, how do we kind of turn all this attention into actual bottom line results, into revenue? And I think that's definitely a big part of it, probably the main part of it. But I also think it goes one step further than that, right? Because once you've got the demand and that has turned into revenue, how can you continue greasing the convert demand wheel to, one, continue to extract long-term value out of that account, out of that customer, in the form of kind of upsell, cross-sell, and other opportunities. But also, how can we kind of leverage that kind of captured demand to amplify our message and acquire our new customers through the network of that account, right? And I think that's when we get into this kind of like word of mouth flywheel that you're going to bring up on screen in just a moment.
And there it is. I was at HubSpot, right? I helped really, I basically was responsible for the inbound methodology. So back in 2010, when I joined HubSpot, I did a project on the side called Content Camp that eventually turned into HubSpot Academy. And I quickly learned that like the powerful thing about software is it helps you with these jobs to be done, thanks to Clay Christensen. And you have to teach people these jobs to be done absent of the software, right? Absent of the software. And this is what this model is trying to do. And this word of mouth flywheel tries to do as well, where it's like, hey, how do you attract, engage, and delight people, which is HubSpot's flywheel, in different ways these days, right? Because I don't think it's just marketing's responsibility only. It can't be marketing's responsibility anymore, Jason, to attract, engage, and delight people. It has to be all of the go-to-market teams, including the product and finance team, that leans into this idea of community, membership, and customers to do what you just said. So ultimately, a lot of what Jason's going to talk about today is rooted in this idea of community plus customer with how do you use content, which is the first thing we're going to talk about right now, to spin this flywheel faster. But I think what, if you listen to the masterclass we did last week about member-led growth, member-led is kind of sits in the middle of these two things, which can pull in people from the community into your brand. It can pull in customers to become members that pull in people from the community, and it could also go the other way. So it's almost like, Jason, you want to have arrows going between all of these things. But at the end of the day, a flywheel's got to spin in one direction. It can't just spin in both directions, or it's like that's impossible. Physics, right? It doesn't work. But just some thoughts there.
Absolutely. And I think, look, it kind of talks to the complexity of the modern day B2B buying journey. I think my background as a marketer is predominantly working in enterprise solutions, right? Long sales cycles, complex products, complex buying committees. And the kind of playbook of how those kind of businesses win new business historically has been fairly straightforward, right? Before the internet, buyers had no option but to, once they'd identified a problem, go to a vendor and allow that vendor to kind of hold their hand through to the point of sale. Now, as we all know, the internet means that B2B buyers can do a lot of that discovery work, that research work, that selection of potential vendors well before they ever pick up the phone or speak to someone, right, on the vendor side. There was some research that came out from Gartner a couple of months ago, or maybe a year ago, which showed that only 17% of the time that B2B buyers are spending purchasing a new solution is meeting with suppliers of that solution. The rest of the time, they're just doing the work on their own, right? They're talking to, they're dialing into their network, they're engaging with communities, they're looking at G2, Capterra, like whatever it is. And then when they're coming into that conversation well informed. So, that is the world that we're now living in, and kind of bringing it back to the multifaceted, multi-direction buyer journey. It's almost impossible. It is impossible to articulate it in a straightforward flywheel model or funnel or whatever you want to call it, because so many things can happen and a buyer can go in so many different directions. But these models are really useful to us as marketers because it allows us to have a conversation with the wider organization on how we should be approaching strategy, right? Everyone knows it's complex, but we need to distill that complexity down into something simple that our executive team can understand. So I think the model is useful in that regard.
I say the best models and frameworks are allow flexibility. They provide guardrails, but then the flexibility in terms of how you deploy it, the creativity that's involved in actually bringing it to life. Those are the best types of mental models and frameworks. And yeah, that's what we're trying to do here. Let's skip ahead to this. So we're going to talk about content led now. And I want to actually show this. I want to start with this, Jason, because you were just hinting at it with your take on like how B2B buying is changing. Don't just take and give. And this comes from a conversation you had with, is it Amanda, right? I think, is it Amanda?
Yeah, I think this was like a couple of conversations that I've had, with Amanda Natividad, VP over at Spock Toro, also with a gentleman called Amit, who was the former VP of marketing at a company called Optimove, I believe. And essentially what this boils down to is, as brands, as B2B companies that are trying to tap into that 95% of out of market customers that may be a good customer for us next week, but they're not buying a solution today. This kind of mentality of adopting a culture of providing free, no strings attached value and committing to that long term is a really great way of creating that demand. I think everyone understands the laws of reciprocity. People are more willing to give you something if you give them something first. And no doubt it's something that we've all tried to implement within our organizations. But I would challenge B2B companies and B2B marketers to really say whether or not they feel they've succeeded in that regard. Are we still throwing up like really kind of vanilla white papers in exchange for email addresses because there's this kind of like pressure within the organization just to get leads and get that kind of short-term opportunity? I can talk a little bit about some of the examples that have been shared by Amanda and Amit that kind of talk to these organizations that are providing this kind of free, no strings attached value. But yeah, I know you want to kind of walk through this slide, Mark. think maybe double muting, sir. Mark, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry, double muted. Again, there you go. My son was kind of having a thing, double mute. I apologize. No, this is just an example of how at a high level, how at least like we kind of think about content-led growth. And you just use some of those words, right? Like actionable, teaching, helpful, genuine, inspiring, like give. It basically just give, right? Build the trust. And at the end of the day, people first GTM is about building as much trust as you can so that trust can maybe turn into a transaction. I mean, that's right. Like
absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard, right? Like we're in a tough economic climate. So the idea of just kind of giving away free value without trying to turn that into a sales pitch, it does require a leap of faith. It requires a mindset within the organization that this is a bet we're going to make for the long-term growth and success of our business. But if you can, as a brand, position yourself as a provider of genuine, free, no strings attached value, if you can help people, if you can find ways to help people be better at their job, the effects of that can and do compound over time.
So how have businesses done that? Let's go into the actual tactical examples and pro tips now. You got a lot to share now. So, and I'll try to pull up the slides where it makes sense, where we're going to highlight these things. But how do you do that from a people first way?
Well, I think kind of one of the examples that immediately jumped to mind is the one of Optimove that I mentioned just a moment ago. So, Optimove, they are a customer data platform, and they have a really strong kind of like content foundation within the organization. The CEO, from what Amit told me on our interview, is kind of bought into the idea of content marketing and kind of inbound and building an inbound machine. And they had really strong metrics, quantitative metrics on their blog, and they were getting a lot of really great anecdotal feedback from the readers of that blog. But because it was a blog that was on their company website, it's naturally going to be perceived as a tool, right? A tool for a business to create demand and try and get a customer to sign up for a demo. So they sat back and they asked themselves, how can we double down on content marketing? How can we kind of position ourselves as this provider of kind of free, no strings attached value and increase the number of touch points that we're having with our customers or our potential customers? So what they did was they went out there and they launched what was in effect a trade publication independent of the company, Optimove. I think there was a little logo in like the kind of bottom footer or something, or maybe in like the copyright. But other than that, it would be quite difficult for someone landing on the website for the first time to think this is a kind of an asset or publication that's owned by a B2B SaaS company. So they started this publication. It was called Post Funnel, and it was a really great mechanism for them to do all the things that we've been talking about, Mark. Create demand, educate the market on the problem, provide free value, but do so in a way that didn't necessarily come with that lens of, this is just another SaaS vendor trying to like pitch me their product. And they had a really great kind of like referral loop built within this trade publication, where they were sourcing direct feedback from their readership that inspired the content that they then went out and created. They have some really cool kind of like ABM mechanisms, which I know we're going to talk about in a moment. And the kind of positive qualitative feedback that they were getting from this trade publication, which again, by all accounts, would not be perceived as a sales tool, was incredible. So I really like that example because I'm a big believer in like media IP and building out media organizations within the B2B environment. And if you can do that in a way that helps create demand indirectly, and strategically place points in that asset that are going to drive high intent visitors back to your site, I think that's a smart play.
Super smart play. Love the example. I'm actually going to pull up this slide now, because what that did was it actually sparked a community, I'm sure, right? They used the content as a really valuable offering, right? And I put something in the chat that maybe, hopefully, let me know. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if that resonates with you all, or a thumbs down if it doesn't. But they use the content to create this really valuable, offering that sparks something in the community. But the way they did that was this: passion. Like passion, because if you don't have passion for something, and like that's where AI. I do not want to make this about AI by any means. We'll hint at it and talk about it a little bit, but like, does AI have passion? I mean, I guess it could be debated. It probably will eventually, maybe, but like I still like human passion, human experience. I don't know, Jason. Like that's people first. So yeah, maybe you unpack this because I know there's another example you have around this when it comes to community and customer, but like passion, point of view, belief systems, very important. I know you've spoken to a lot of people about those things in the podcast too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the development of a point of view is absolutely critical for a B2B organization to have cut through in their marketing strategy. And where this usually kind of distills itself down to is the founder. I think about some of the most successful kind of B2B organizations that that I know. I think of Patrick Campbell, for example, from Profitwell. I think of Nathan Latka from Founder Path. I think of Chris Walker from Refine Labs. These are all people. I think of Amelia Sordell from Cloud Agency. These are all experts in their field who have developed distinct, unique, differentiated points of view. Whether or not you agree with those points of view is one thing, but they've developed them and they do a fantastic job in articulating those points of view at scale across their personal and their brand accounts. And it reminds me of an interview that I did with Tina Donati, who is a direct-to-consumer expert, a direct-to-consumer marketing consultant. And we talked a lot about the founder story on this episode. And what she was talking about was people want to feel like they're part of something, that's really exciting. People want to feel like they're working with a company that has an interesting story, both, a story of where it's been and a story of where it's going. They want to feel like they understand the company's mission, the company's values, and all of this kind of really helps build out the credibility within an organization. And founder stories, in D2C, in direct to consumer, they're ubiquitous, right? You need to have a founder story if you're an early stage direct to consumer company to find cut through. Yet, I think when we look at B2B and really kind of outside MarTech and sales tech, how many kind of B2B founders that are going out there banging the drum and really articulating a unique point of view at scale and consistently can we think of? I don't know. I can't think of many. So I think it comes back to the point, right? Passion. What they have is they have passion for their perspective, I think kind of finding the way to unlock that as a marketer within a B2B organization is critical, and will be even more so moving forward.
Passion for their perspective. Another one-liner that you can take away from this. That's quotable.
Might get into a t-shirt. Might put into onto a t-shirt or something.
100%. You should do that. 100%. Yeah. Yeah, so Sam, like so much AI content is just devoid of any passion feeling. It seems like everyone just looks past it. Makes me feel like I'm going crazy sometimes. I agree. I mean, I use some AI tools. That's fine. I think AI tools are fine. But like, I did a post just today before this about like AI. The conversation should be about the strategic things that AI helps people do and how it makes us happier, not more productive. That's a whole different debate. I'm not going to go through that right now. But what also you're leading us down is this idea of passion to emotion, right? Like. So like, let me, I want to unpack this example. Let me share just this idea of emotional marketing. I've also heard people use the term like empathetic marketing, which is definitely kind of like a people first thing, but like emotional marketing. Who was the guest that was speaking to you about this and what were they doing when it came to emotional marketing, creating that deep connection, almost resonance with people?
So emotional marketing is a really interesting concept. Because I think, B2B generally gets a bad rap because it's perceived as being buttoned up, and it has been for a very long time. And this has been a point of conversation in a lot of B2B marketing circles, increasingly so over the last few years, where now we're kind of like almost seeing the pendulum kind of swing to a little bit too much the other way, where it's like now you see all these B2B brands doing a load of like interesting, funny, engaging, entertaining stuff, but some of it comes across as perhaps a little bit gimmicky, and I think that's something that we need to be important. It's important for us to mind as we're thinking about emotion in marketing. there are times where it makes sense, but then there are times where it doesn't. We have to remember that in some instances, again, coming from an enterprise background, if we're selling into like a CTO of a Fortune 500 company, sending them our TikTok account where we're like doing some funny skits behind the scene in the office may not go down the way that we intended to. So I just want to kind of like caveat the kind of emotional marketing piece with that before we kind of go any further. But I think emotional marketing, it was really kind of driven home for me in my interview with Amanda Natividad, VP of SparkToro, and she talked a lot about the need for B2B companies to find ways to resonate with their customers on a more emotional level. And one of the ways that she kind of outlined that companies could look at doing this was through B2B influencers, people who represent the brand and they advocate for the brand's message through their content. And these can be influencers that either work for the organization, employees, or these can be kind of B2B influencers that you partner with externally. I think Amanda's a great example of this, just like as a person, right? She's got like 130,000 followers on Twitter. She's got 32,000 followers on LinkedIn. She's got this massive audience that consume content because it's coming from her. It's coming from her voice. And she's just not out there shouting in the megaphone about SparkToro. She's talking about everything that's kind of going on in her life, from her passion for cooking, for her son, her children, for all sorts of different things. She's coming across as a human, as a person, because she's showing that kind of emotion and kind of allowing you to have a kind of peek behind the curtain of her life. I also think of other examples like, I spoke to Emily Brady. Formerly, she worked at Sweetfish. She had a fantastic TikTok account where she was doing songs and raps and all sorts of different things about B2B marketing, which, because it was coming from a company that kind of makes its living on creating creative content for businesses, it felt appropriate, right? It felt genuine. Mark Thomas, recently minted head of growth at Podia, another example of someone who kind of leverages entertainment and emotion in his marketing for the benefit of his business. Final thing I'll say is I think like there are a lot of brands out there that are trying and experimenting with emotion in their marketing. From where I'm standing, it's predominantly in kind of like high volume, low price point SaaS market, specifically MarTech and sales tech, where we're seeing it, because the types of buyers that those companies are selling to are going to be the ones most likely to respond to more emotional marketing. But there are some examples of companies that fall outside MarTech, sales tech that are doing this. So I'd highly recommend you check out a company called Vilpe. They are a Finnish roofing manufacturer. Last time I checked, they had 100,000 followers on TikTok. And it's because, it's crazy. And I interviewed them on the podcast, Maria Erikslund. You can check out that episode. She basically breaks down their strategy. It's because their whole kind of TikTok social media digital strategy is kind of based on this idea of like showing the people behind the organization. So they have like the CEO often doing videos talking about, yes, the product, but actually more, his passion for Dungeons and Dragons. And they did like a really authentic video earlier this year where they were talking about the difficulties that the construction manufacturing industry are currently facing and how that's having a knock-on effect to their business. And it's just, I feel like it's a great example of a non-tech business, non-software business that is deploying emotion in a really authentic and human way. And in terms of net result, whilst on the interview, they weren't able to kind of share with me, how much revenue was attributed to their strategy. They were able to share with me that they've never had more applications to come and work at the company since they started doing TikTok. And when you think about the fact that they are a company based in northern Finland, you kind of need to be in the office to work there because it's construction, right? I think that's a huge testament to what they're doing over there. So yeah, a couple of examples there of emotion in B2B.
I love it. And folks, if you have any examples, you want to chime in, raise your hands, feel free. We'll bring you on stage or just put in the chat. A few things to unpack there. I know Amanda talks about zero click content. I believe that's what it's called. Zero click content. That's another way to do both content creation and community development or growth, creating content that sits within the platform. TikTok's an example of this, where it's not like getting you to click out to somewhere else, like your website or a publication or somewhere else. It's zero-click content. You get value right there in that experience, which leads me into some of the stuff that you just talked about as it relates to community-led. Let me just flash this up on the screen really quick. And that is around the things community-led growth is trying to do. It's trying to create this demand, create this interest, build this trust, influence people, but be helpful, right? And you're doing it mostly off of your properties, right? Like I think that the example that you did around that was content that led into community, like technically, like you just said, it was off their official company domain or property, right? Like the URL. So it's super interesting when you think about like the intersections of these things and how they influence one another. And that's why I'm always trying to tell people, like, it's not one or the other. And it comes down to like, how do you integrate these things together for your particular business model based off of your price point, what you're selling, who you're selling it to, and a few other things. And that's what we're going to talk more and more about inside of the club. But to me, it's finding people that believe in what you believe in. And if I skip ahead to just like, I guess this slide, I'm going to go to this slide right now. It's having a focus on resonance and quality over quantity. And I just think that is super important. And I will admit myself, Jason, it is hard for me and most humans to do. Right? Like, because you just always want to do more. You're almost taught it's in a young age to keep doing more.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it kind of every day when I'm talking to clients. One of the things that we do here at B2B Better is we help brands kind of set up and build out their own podcasts. And often when I'm speaking to clients or potential clients, the first question I'm asking is like, what does success look like for you? And the answer I typically get back is like downloads. Like, we want to see a huge number of downloads. But then when you start unpacking that a little bit, it's like, well, why do we want downloads? Like, what is downloads going to give us that we're seeking, right? That's sought after by us. And that is a question that they find difficult to answer, because we're almost kind of like programmed as businesses to think that big numbers equals good. Doesn't matter what the number is, it's good. What we're really looking for, what these customers are typically looking for, is they're looking for new relationships. They're looking for new ways of building out connections with their market that they're struggling to do through other means. Okay, well, if that's what we're trying to do here, then downloads maybe isn't the metric we should be measuring. We should be measuring something like guest pitch to win ratio. If we're sending out 100 kind of invites to prospective guests that fit a profile that we've identified, we want to target like a 60% agree rate, people who agree to come onto the podcast. That to me feels like a better metric to be tracking, because it's grounded in quality versus quantity. So yeah, I think we're programmed to try and scale and hit these big numbers, but actually the best results come from like taking a step back and really focusing on the quality of what it is that we're trying to target.
And you had an episode, I think it was with Christina from HubSpot. She's fantastic. She talked about like niching down. At the highest level, I think what we're talking about here too is finding your tribe, right? That TikTok example, that company, was in Finland, right? You said
Finland, yeah.
Finland, yeah, like fantastic, right? Like they're not trying to please everyone. Like they're being super, kind of just putting themselves out there, super authentic, and they're finding the tribe. They're finding the people that believe in that point of view, that have similar feelings, or also altruistic. They're like, I don't have realized that point of view or that feeling yet, but I aspire. I have an altruistic motivation to be like these other people. And those things then drive people to form that connection with other people who then represent a brand, because that's how to think about people first. Like, you're representing a brand, if you will, right? So tell us more about finding this tribe and some examples from the people you spoke to around this part of community-led, if you will.
Well, the ironic thing with Vilpay, the Finnish company, is that in kind of like niching down and being focused, just by virtue of who they are as an organization, they have been able to capture volume because they've now got 100,000 followers on TikTok. So, they've kind of like focused in on doing something with the intention of, we're going to just talk about this. But in doing that, and because the quality has been so high, they've found those kind of like concentric circles of audience, right, that are now following their content, even if they aren't necessarily going to be a customer. So, I think it can kind of spin both ways. You mentioned Christina. Yeah, again, fantastic marketer, and being the community manager over there at kind of HubSpot, and kind of like representative of the Hub fans. She's got this monumental task on her hands of like finding a way to kind of maintain the quality of a community that is inherently going to be quite large. If you're a HubSpot user, you're going to fall into her domain at some point, right? If you want to be part of that HubSpot community. And when you've got a community of hundreds of thousands, millions of people, how do you ensure that there's something for everyone? And she talked about this concept of like macro growth, micro opportunities. As you scale a community, figure out what kind of smaller groups exist and can be nurtured within it. Because as it grows, inherently, it's going to lose its intimacy if you don't do anything about it. She gave a great example of, I think she's a Virginia Tech fan, college football. And she kind of illustrated it to me like, when I'm in the stadium with a kind of 59,999 other fans, and our team scores a touchdown, we're all celebrating. We're all part of this community. The people I'm really celebrating with are the 6 or 7 kind of individuals that I've come with, my friends and my family. So how can you take that model and take that concept, if you do own a big community or a big audience, and apply it to your own stuff? And that is largely going to be, it's going to definitely have unscalable elements, right? Because we talked a little bit about AI, and we don't want to go down this road, but there is, I think, a tendency for people to try and like automate as much of community as they possibly can, because as it grows, it's going to be difficult to manage. But think about the best communities that you're part of. Yeah, don't do it, right? Think about the best communities that you're part of. They're the ones that have that intimate, that human connection. Christina sends me a message on Twitter every single week, personally, keeping me up to date with what's going on in the Hub Fans Council. I mean, I just feel like that's incredible, right? Because there's hundreds of people in there. And every time there's something that she thinks I'm going to find of interest, she's hitting me up on Twitter, sending me a LinkedIn or whatever. As a member now, I'm thinking, we go back to reciprocal value. How can I help? How can I help her? How can I help this community be bigger than it actually is? So, go back and listen to the episode with Christina, because she kind of breaks down finding your tribe and how to maximize the value of a community fantastically in that one.
Yeah, I love it. She was actually on my podcast too, that Community Sense podcast I mentioned, and she did an episode, and it was fantastic. So, listen to your episode, and then just check her out, like Hub Fans. Like it's a great example of the intersection of customers plus people that are just fans of HubSpot, maybe also members of HubSpot Academy, which is member-led growth. And it's ultimately like one of many, many things that have created this massive ecosystem and word of mouth flywheel around HubSpot. It's an interesting fact, Jason. Like if you look at any of their earnings calls, they've been doing this for years now. They talk about what leads, what is the biggest drivers of customer acquisition. They have a slide in their investor deck every quarter for this. Number one thing, and they can quantify this, they've measured this, that drives acquisition of customers is word of mouth.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think that I think there's a lot of organizations, that will believe that and want to try and replicate that, but will kind of struggle to know where to start or like how to measure it. So I don't know if we want to kind of like jump onto like people first attribution here, because this feels like it's a natural segue.
You read my mind. Let's do that, and then we can go to customer led. This is you teed it up so well, Jason. Let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, some people call this self-reported attribution. I think, I'm biased, Jason, but I think people first attribution is actually maybe a more correct way to and nicer way to say it, right? Like, but unpack this, yeah, because I know you've spoken to a lot of guests about this. We do this at AirMeet. I wish I was doing this way earlier in my career in marketing, just asking people, how did you hear about us? How did you find us? And then, it's still, you can use software, first attribution as well. but at a minimum, you got to do people first, and you have to probably, for some businesses that are like larger and bigger, like do both. But I've done software-based attribution at 3 really big companies, Airmeet, Drift, and HubSpot. Guess what? It's very uncommon that anything's going to be that surprising for you when you look at software-based attribution.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, I think there's a place for all of it, right? And I think there's a danger in kind of,
True.
thinking it's either one way or the other. Like there is value in both. Software-based attribution, it's going to give you an indication as to like what were the kind of the channels that converted a customer, that kind of converted that demand, from wherever they were to like closing down on the bottom line. The people first attribution, the self-reported attribution, all that kind of stuff is really, really important for building out a better picture of like what was the journey that led that person to that final acquisition channel. So I think they can both be used to great effect. I think self-reported attribution, throwing a field on a form where did you hear about us is a good idea. It will give you some insights. I think it probably goes one step further than that. I think about B2B Better, for example. I've been doing it for 3 years now. I've definitely got software that's like telling me, various metrics of success, right? That's kind of helping me guide my strategy. But the stuff I really value is the anecdotal feedback that I get from B2B Better. It's people reaching out to me on LinkedIn and saying, "Oh, we noticed you changed up the format of the episodes. Like, we love it. Keep doing that." It's a guest who I'm interviewing saying, "Oh yeah, I'm good friends with person X who you had on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. They couldn't talk highly enough about the experience." Like, fuck yeah, that's like the stuff that I'm looking for. And again, Amanda Natividad, who I interviewed on B2B Better about a year ago, she talked a lot about this as well. When they're running their office hours, the kind of weekly or fortnightly webinar series they do, where they're essentially just taking questions from their audience. They're really analyzing, the kind of like questions that are coming in from people, and if they're coming in regularly, they're using that to kind of guide their ongoing strategy, to guide the ongoing questions that they're going to answer. If they're seeing trends around people saying like, "Great, you answered that question that I asked like perfectly," that's a really great positive qualitative indicator that they're on the right track. If they get that feedback coming back saying, "You kind of missed the mark a little bit on that one, we can adapt and we can do better next time." Like, this is not a software automated. This is not something that software can can necessarily capture at scale. It requires you to do that grunt work and have someone like Rand Fishkin and Amanda, leaders of this business, to actually get their hands dirty and like analyze. But it's what's allowed them to kind of grow as quickly and as fast as they have done. And like Spark Toro has now gone very quickly from nothing a few years ago to like being a must-have in the marketer's toolkit. So yeah, do the unscalable. Bit cliche, but it is what it is.
I think you have to do people first attribution because it helps you find go-to-market fit. That's the simplest way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I mean, software-based, attribution, software first. They'd look at it. It's usually like a multi-touch type of setup. That's usually last touch, right? So we have it at an Airmeet. There's 5 key conversion moments in the journey. What did they do right before they became a meeting, right before they became an opportunity, right before they became a new lead? And then what was the channel that drove them into that? But inherently, there's probably a person on the other end driving them to that channel or driving them from that channel into your conversion point. And that's what's missing in the software attribution. There's also people first. It's going to tell you ultimately the strongest things that create a meaningful impression and feeling within someone's mind that they remember enough to put on that or within that form as an answer.
Yeah. And I think that's like a really important point, because I think often you hear people kind of fight back a little bit against self-reported attribution and saying like, well, they're not necessarily saying the first thing that they experienced which led them to you. They're just saying the thing that they remember, right? Recency bias. I think that's fine. Like we can try and through then kind of focus groups or kind of one-to-one interviews with select customers, drill down a little bit deeper and like really ask some targeted questioning on, okay, you mentioned this on the form. Is that really where you heard about us for the first time, or did you hear about us before then? But I think if we kind of go into it with the understanding of like, this isn't about the first time you heard about us, but it's like the most important time that you heard about us. That's where the real value comes.
Just nailed it. Another one-liner from Jason. It's the most important time. That's exactly right. So many tweets, so many LinkedIn posts can come from it, right?
Yeah.
Let's switch for the last 10 or so minutes, 15 minutes maybe, into customer led. We've talked about it a little bit, but let's go right at it. And customer led is arguably, probably the most important, maybe out of all of them. If you look at this slide, it's really about like value, reciprocity, voice of customer, actual education. There's other tenets as well, but like those are like the top four in my mind. There's a lot of components to it. Like you talked about the Hub Fans Advisory Board, right? There's community advisory boards, there's customer advisory boards. There's at the end of the day, it's about partnering with your customers, right? Partnering with your customers so they don't just stick around and see more value. They become advocates. They become a huge piece of that word of mouth flywheel that gets more and more community engagement happening, et cetera, et cetera. So I know we have a few different examples here, and actually some examples that have to deal with the sales team that you want to talk about. Maybe where do you want to start first, Jason?
We can jump into the sales team stuff. Yeah, I think that's a good place to go.
Okay. And I think it's right here, actually. The menu of initiatives for sales. It's like, what do you mean menu of initiatives for sales? I'm going to tell salespeople to do something? Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. Well, this was actually kind of another component of the Optimove kind of trade publication that Amit built out, where essentially they wanted to find ways to use the publication to help open doors with prospective clients. And this wasn't about kind of like creating content that they would then let me take a step back there. What they essentially were going to do was they presented to their sales team a list of initiatives that came from the trade publication that they could use to foster new relationships with their prospective clients. So what I mean by that is, hey, we want to, making up companies here, like we want to try and sell into the BBC, for example. Using the trade publication, we can kind of do a deep dive piece of analysis on kind of the technology stack of the BBC, or we can write a profile on one of the key executives and publish that onto the blog. And then sales team can then take that asset and use it as a point of leverage to try and open a door over at that prospective account. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone there. One, you are creating a piece of collateral that your sales team can go out there and use to try and win new business. And it's something that they have a vested interest in because they're the ones that have chosen it from the kind of hypothetical menu. But you're also creating a piece of high quality content that can live on the blog or live on the trade publication, forevermore, and continue to kind of play into that kind of creating demand piece. Because as more readers are on the publication, as more people are consuming that piece of content, you're continuing to kind of create demand with them.
That's that ABM example you hinted at a little bit ago.
Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly right.
Otherwise known for my point of view too, is the ego trap play to some degree.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the ego trap thing is interesting because it is 100% like accurate. I think there is a certain, I don't want to broad stroke it, but I think kind of like the more senior you go into an organization and the larger that organization is, the higher possibility is that you're going to be able to kind of tap into that kind of ego trap play. I think we can talk a bit about customer reviews and testimonials in a moment, but like, an organization that I work for, we had an account that we were desperate to do some sort of co-marketing with, whether it was a press release or a case study. It was going to be the key that would help us unlock like the next rung of accounts that we wanted to go after, because it was just a huge boost of credibility. But going down the conventional PR or case study route was just something that the legal team wouldn't touch. Right? They didn't want to do it because there was reasons like contractual reasons why they didn't want to do it, but they couldn't do it. But when we pitched to that client, one of the executives within that client, who we knew was eager to go out there and build their own personal profile, an opportunity to attend an event with us, speak on stage, talk about the relationship a little bit, 100%, they bit our hand off. They couldn't get there quick enough because this was a big premium opportunity. And inadvertently, we ended up getting what we wanted in the first place, which was that credibility piece. You see us on stage with one of our customers talking about, the challenges that we've tackled together. So, that ego trap, if you kind of play it strategically, it can ultimately come out in your favor.
And there could be multiple levels of ego trap plays. There's a ton of different ones. You should probably do a whole masterclass on them at some point inside the club. But at the high level, some people call this also just social proof, Jason. And if I had to give everyone a tactical thing to do right now, go to your website, and do a quick audit of how much social proof, customer evidence you have on your website, and on what pages. Because I can almost promise you, and we're guilty of this at Airmeet even, you probably don't have enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, as a consultant, I feel almost somewhat like it's redundant, like offering it as advice to potential customers. I'm like, they're paying me money and I'm basically telling them to go out there and get more case studies and more social proof and more testimonials. But the reason is because it is one of the most effective tools to, capture demand. And two, a lot of people either aren't doing it or aren't doing it well enough. And there are lots of different ways that you can go out there and get this social proof. As you said, you could look on social media, see what people are saying about you there. You can look at, G2, Capterra, look at reviews from there and reach out to people and see if you can kind of whip out their kind of testimonial into a fully fledged case study. You can track transcripts of calls with your account managers, what are the nice things that our customers are saying about us, and use that as, hey, would we be able to take what you said there and just put it onto our website? You can find ways to incorporate asks into your product. You can do the podcast thing or kind of the event opportunity thing, as I mentioned a moment ago with this former customer. Lots of ways to go about and do it, but you have to put the effort in to actually do it, because unless you ask, customers will very rarely give you the testimonial and give you that social proof unprompted.
It's true. That's 5-6 tactical things you can do right now. I love those. That's fantastic. And then there's one more thing to cover off and tie off with customer led. Sales amplification. Again, trying to get salespeople or other go-to-market people to amplify things sounds awesome. How do you do it though? What have you heard from your guests?
Yeah, I mean, sales teams are probably one of the most underutilized resources that I see marketing teams kind of forgetting about. Basically, your kind of collective social network, kind of held by your employees, is going to be 10 times larger than that of your brand account at any given time. The more employees you bring, the larger your brand account gets. There's always going to be a 10-to-1 ratio on average. And salespeople in particular are going to be the ones that have the largest networks on social media and offline. So kind of finding ways to kind of leverage them to go out there and promote your message and kind of develop their own thought leadership profiles has got to be a priority. And it was, kind of Ross Simmons, CEO of Foundation Marketing, who really drove this home for me when we spoke about content and content distribution. We can talk about some of the kind of tactical ways that marketing can leverage sales to go out there and preach the gospel. But for Ross, where it really started was there needs to be shared KPIs between marketing and sales, right? They have to be essentially one unit when it comes to measurement, not be two siloed divisions. Because when they're sharing the same metrics and they're both pointed towards the same direction, that's when you start building out trust between the two functions, but also an impetus to experiment and invest in different tactics and different strategies. It's not natural for a lot of salespeople outside of maybe MarTech, sales tech, and SaaS to like go out there and position themselves as a thought leader on social media, especially in enterprise, like where you have salespeople who've been selling big deals for 20, 30, 40 years, just kind of jumping on LinkedIn and whacking out a post about here's where I see the industry going. For us, it's easy, but like for them, not so much. So like as a marketing team, we have to be empathetic towards that and find ways to help nudge them along. We shouldn't have to do it for them, because I think that's where you kind of lose a little bit of the authenticity. And like, this is what this whole conversation's about: authenticity and being human and being personal. But we have to have empathy that a lot of salespeople are starting from ground zero. So like, how can we build a structure to set them up for success?
Yeah, no, agreed. It's again another whole episode on that probably. We're coming up on time a little bit. I want to just share two more things with people. Thank you, Jason, so much for everything. We'll wrap it up in just a second. But for folks who aren't members yet, this is all part of this new B2B membership club, we started, called Club PF. It comes with a ton of benefits. Shout out to a few of you folks already in the call today. I know Sam's one who's already a member. I got a link right in the screen to have you check it out and maybe sign up. A special heads up, sneak peek. I founded this about 6 weeks ago. I work very closely with someone who and I gotten to know each other a lot over the last 9 months. His name is Nick Bennett. We've decided to actually become co-founders of this club officially. We're going to take it live to the public next week, but I want to give you some insight that he's joined up as a co-founder and is going to be adding a ton of value along with myself. So that's why this is happening. And it's really happening, though, because of the guy that was just speaking and dropping so much knowledge bombs, Jason from B2B Better. Jason, like, tell us more about this and how can people work with you?
Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun, Mark. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and we've covered a lot of ground. And as you say, I think this could be a whole course where we take each of these slides and like pack it out into its own thing. But a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is helping B2B companies build out content marketing programs, specifically focused on like how can we use a podcast as a growth lever within the function. This is something that I've done for myself with B2B Better, and something that I've done with kind of enterprise B2B tech clients in former lives. So right now I'm running free 60-minute brainstorm calls for businesses that may be thinking about setting up their own podcast, but not just as a kind of vanity creative project, but as something that can actually help them generate revenue. So using the link on the page that you can see in front of you now, you can book that call with me. We'll talk about what success looks like for a podcast in your business, what resources you currently have and you need to execute on an effective podcast, what an 8-week roadmap looks like to go from 0 to your first episode, and finally, kind of actionable tips that I've picked up on 90 plus episodes of doing my own podcast that can help you deliver tangible ROI. So yeah, we'd love to talk to people about this. Just visit the link on the page.
There's no one better than Jason when it comes to podcasting. I mean, he's an expert, especially, and this is the key, a podcast that drives revenue, right? Yeah, it's gonna create demand. It's gonna capture demand, most importantly, and your customers are gonna love it too. It's gonna help you convert that demand into more lifetime value for them, for your business. Podcasting, my friend. It's I think it's actually going to be, I got a bold prediction here, and then we can wrap it up. I think, and we can probably do another whole thing about this, podcasting is going to be disrupted by AI, just like everything else. It's going to, in a good way.
In that kind of blogs are going to be more at risk of AI generated content and podcasts have more of a moat, or what do you think in there?
No. I think podcasting will become much more effective at reaching relevant audiences, giving you better data, because it's going to give people both who are trying to consume podcasts, but also produce podcasts, a way to connect through intelligence that is unimaginable today, right? Like, hey, I want to learn about this thing. Like, what's the most relevant podcast for me, and how do I find those people, and vice versa? And like, there will be an AI first podcast thing that comes out that will disrupt the incumbents. That's my opinion. That will be better for both sides of the coin.
That's brilliant. We need to get you back on my podcast. I don't know how many times we've said podcast on this episode. We need to get you back on the pod and we can talk about that in more detail.
I love it. No, I love it. Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be, there's definitely tools out there, Sam. I hear that, but I think there's going to be an actual platform equivalent to Spotify, distribution platform for podcast AI first.
That's cool. Hot take. You heard it here first.
Hot take. Hey, give Jason a round of applause, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the first ever Club PF event of the month. We're going to do another big one in June. We've got something big planned. And Jason, you're welcome back anytime. Of course, you can join the club, and we'd love to have you.
I appreciate it. This has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much. Again, it's such an honor to have met you and got to know you a little bit over the last couple of months. And I really appreciate being the inaugural guest on this. So again, had a blast.
Thank you so much. Cheers to more things in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.